While you were watching gas prices and arguing about the war, the largest restructuring of the American safety net since the Great Society was signed into law, implemented across 50 states, and activated against tens of millions of people. And I would bet everything I have that most of you watching this right now do not know what was actually in the bill. You know the name, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. You probably heard it was a tax cut, and for some people it is. But buried inside those 116 pages is something that the Congressional Budget Office projects will strip health insurance from 10 million Americans by 2034, remove food assistance from 2.4 million people in an average month, eliminate 1.22 million jobs across the economy, according to the Commonwealth Fund, and reduce resources for households in the lowest income decile by 4%. The CBO, which is the nonpartisan agency that Congress itself relies on to score legislation, published those numbers. The Commonwealth Fund, one of the most respected healthcare research organizations in the country, published an analysis showing that the Medicaid and SNAP cuts alone would destroy nearly 500,000 healthcare jobs and more than 700,000 jobs in other sectors. That is the equivalent of raising the national unemployment rate by almost a full percentage point. And the RBC economics team published an analysis this month warning that the law creates a cascading implementation schedule that distributes impact unevenly across 2026, meaning the pain arrives in waves, quarter by quarter, so that no single news cycle captures the full scope of what is happening. That is not an accident, that is design. And what I am about to show you is what actually changed, what is still changing right now in April 2026, and what is locked in to hit you over the next 6 months. Because the average American has no idea what just happened to them. And by the time most people figure it out, the changes will have already reshaped their health care, their food assistance, their student loans, their electric bill, their job security, and their children's future. And nobody will be able to say they were not warned. Because I am warning you right now, they gutted Medicaid and called it reform. $863 billion. That is how much the One Big Beautiful Bill Act cut from Medicaid over the next 10 years. $863 billion ripped out of a program that covers 93 million Americans, including 40% of all children in this country, 60% of nursing home residents, and millions of disabled adults who have no other option. The AMA, the American Medical Association, called it an outrage. They said it will cause an estimated 11.8 million people to lose healthcare coverage. The Brookings Institution projects between 7.5 million and 10 million people will lose Medicaid directly. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities puts the total uninsured increase at 15 million when you combine the Medicaid cuts with the ACA marketplace changes. 15 million more uninsured Americans, and the mechanism they use to do it is something most people will never understand, because it was designed to be invisible. Work requirements. Starting December 31, 2026, all states must require Medicaid enrollees aged 19 to 64 to document 80 hours per month of work, community service or job training to maintain their eligibility. 80 hours a month. That sounds reasonable on paper until you understand who actually loses coverage under work requirements. Arkansas implemented Medicaid work requirements in 2018. A study published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that 18,000 people lost coverage in just 5 months. And here is the critical finding. The vast majority of people who lost coverage were already working or should have been exempt. They lost coverage because of paperwork failures. They did not understand the reporting requirements. They missed a deadline. They could not navigate the online portal. They had unstable work hours that fluctuated month to month. They were caregivers who did not know they qualified for an exemption. The work requirements did not make people work. They made people lose health care. And now that same policy is being imposed on every state in the country, affecting tens of millions of people, during a labor market that just lost 92,000 jobs in a single month. Brookings warned explicitly that a weakening labor market raises the stakes of these cuts because it increases the need for Medicaid while simultaneously making it harder for people to meet the 80-hour work requirement. If you lose your job in 2027 and you are under 65, you do not just lose your income, you lose your health insurance. That was never how Medicaid was supposed to work. It was supposed to be the program that catches you when everything else fails, and they turned it into a program that requires you to prove you deserve to be caught. Meanwhile, states are also being forced to re-verify expansion enrollee eligibility every 6 months, instead of annually starting in December 2026. That doubles the paperwork burden for the most vulnerable people in the system. And states with outdated technology or large populations with language barriers will see what analysts are calling a spike in wrongful terminations. People who qualify for Medicaid will lose it because the system cannot process their paperwork fast enough. That is not reform. That is administrative attrition designed to reduce enrollment by making the process so difficult that people give up. The food assistance cut that will ripple through every small town in America. At the same time, they cut $863 billion from Medicaid. They cut between $187 billion and $295 billion from SNAP over the next decade, depending on which scoring methodology you use. The Food Research and Action Center called it the deepest SNAP cut in history. And April 2026 is one of the most significant months in SNAP history because several of the major changes are rolling out right now, simultaneously, across all 50 states. First, work requirements were expanded. Under the old rules, work requirements applied to adults aged 18 to 54 who did not have dependents. The OBBA raised the upper age limit to 64. That means adults between 55 and 64, people who are approaching retirement, people with chronic health conditions that do not quite qualify them for disability, people who were laid off at 58 and cannot get an interview because of age discrimination. These people are now required to document 20 hours per week of work or job training, or they lose their food assistance. Second, the parental exemption was narrowed. Previously, a parent with a child under 18 was exempt from work requirements. The OBBA lowered that to 14. If your youngest child is 14 or older, you are now subject to work requirements even if you are a single parent managing a household. Third, entire categories of non-citizens who were previously eligible for SNAP were removed. Refugees, asylees, trafficking survivors, and certain humanitarian parolees are no longer eligible. Fourth, starting in October 2026, the federal government's share of SNAP administrative costs drops from 50% to 25%. States will have to cover 75% of administrative costs, and here is what that means for your community, whether you receive SNAP or not. Every dollar in SNAP benefits generates up to $1.80 in local economic activity, according to the USDA. When a family spends their SNAP benefits at the local grocery store, that money pays the cashier, the stocker, the truck driver who delivered the food, the farmer who grew it. When you cut SNAP, you do not just take food off one family's table. You pull money out of every small grocer, every food retailer, every farmer's market, every local economy that depends on those purchases. The Commonwealth Fund analysis found that the SNAP cuts alone will eliminate more than 700,000 jobs nationwide, not in Wall Street offices, in grocery stores, in food processing plants, in local restaurants, in the supply chains that feed small-town America. And in New York City, March 2026 was the first month counting toward the 3-month time limit for newly required individuals aged 55 to 64. If they do not report qualifying work hours for March, April, and May, they lose benefits in June. That clock is ticking right now, and most of the people on it do not even know it started. The USDA's own food security report from December 2025 showed that 47.9 million Americans already lived in food-insecure households before these cuts took effect. The deepest SNAP cuts in history are landing on a country where nearly 48 million people were already going hungry. That is what changed, and the average American has no idea. Your tax cut is actually a tax increase. And here is the math. This is the part that I think is the most cynical thing I have ever seen in economic policy, and I need you to understand it because it directly affects how much money you will actually have in your pocket over the next 5 years. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act was sold as a tax cut. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, higher SALT deduction cap from $10,000 to $40,000. Extension of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. On the surface, those sound like wins for working Americans. And for some higher-income households, they genuinely are. But here is what they did not tell you. The RBC economics team published a detailed analysis showing that the CBO estimates resources for households in the lowest income decile will decrease by approximately 4% by 2033. The primary drivers are the cuts to SNAP and Medicaid. And the reason is structural. The no tax on tips and no tax on overtime provisions are structured as deductions, not refundable credits. A deduction reduces your taxable income, but if you are a single person earning $15,000 a year, you already pay zero in federal income tax because the standard deduction of $16,100 exceeds your income. An additional deduction gives you nothing. Zero. The bottom 20% of earners lose transfer income from SNAP and Medicaid and gain no tax relief whatsoever. Meanwhile, top earners benefit from locked-in income tax brackets, 100% bonus depreciation for business investments, and the SALT cap increase that primarily benefits households in high-cost blue states earning between $150,000 and $500,000 a year. What this means in plain language is that they cut programs that feed and insure the poorest Americans and use the savings to fund tax cuts that primarily benefit the wealthiest Americans, and then called the entire package a tax cut for working families. And here is the even more insidious part that the walking tour videos I reviewed captured perfectly. Because the tax cuts reduce government revenue, the deficit widens. The CBO projects $1.9 trillion deficits this year, growing to $3.1 trillion by 2036. That additional deficit spending increases the money supply, which is inflationary by definition. So even if your nominal tax bill goes down slightly, the purchasing power of every dollar you earn declines because of the inflation generated by the deficit spending that funded the tax cut. You get a smaller tax bill and higher grocery prices, a smaller tax bill and higher gas prices, a smaller tax bill and a doubled health insurance premium. The tax cut is real on paper, but the inflation it generates is real in your wallet. And the net effect for the average American family making between $40,000 and $80,000 a year is negative. You are worse off. You just cannot see it because the tax cut is visible and the inflation is invisible. One of the creators I watch put it perfectly. He said the only difference between what is happening in the UK, where they raise taxes straight to your face during a weak economy, and what is happening here is that we do it behind your back. We say taxes are going down, but in reality, they are going up through inflation. And unfortunately, people get tricked by this because everybody wants to see their taxes go down. It makes you feel temporarily wealthier. It makes you spend more today, but it means you will have less in the future once inflation rocks your wallet. That is what changed. And the average American has no idea. The war changed the price of everything, and it is not going back. On top of the policy changes that most people did not notice, there is a structural economic shift that happened on February 28, 2026, that has permanently altered the cost basis of American life, and I do not think most people have processed what it actually means. When the United States and Israel launched strikes on Iran and Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz in response, it did not just create a temporary spike in gas prices, it severed the supply chains for oil, natural gas, fertilizer, sulfur, helium, aluminum, methanol, and petrochemical feedstocks that the entire global economy depends on. The IEA called it the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Not in recent history. In history. And the damage to critical infrastructure in the Gulf is not temporary. Qatar's Ras Laffan LNG complex, which is one of the most important liquefied natural gas facilities on Earth, sustained damage that analysts estimate will take 3 to 5 years to fully repair. That single facility's impairment will keep global LNG prices elevated for the rest of this decade, regardless of whether the war ends tomorrow. Maritime insurance premiums through the Strait surged from 0.25% of vessel value to 5 to 10%, a 20 to 40-fold increase. Even after a ceasefire, shipping companies will not send tankers through that waterway until premiums normalize, and that takes months of demonstrated safety. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the emergency oil stockpile that was supposed to be America's insurance policy against exactly this kind of event, released 400 million barrels, the largest drawdown in history. And it barely moved the needle. Gas is still above $4. Diesel is still above $5.40. The nuclear option did not work, and 70% of American refinery capacity was built to process heavy sour crude from the Middle East, not the light sweet crude we produce domestically. So even though America is technically the largest oil producer on Earth, our refineries cannot fully utilize our own product. That is a structural vulnerability that cannot be fixed in months or even years. It requires a complete overhaul of refinery infrastructure that would cost hundreds of billions of dollars. What this means for your family is that the era of $2.50 gas and $3.50 diesel is probably over. Not for this month, not for this quarter. For this era, the cost of transportation has undergone a structural shift, and every single product that moves by truck, which is 72.5% of everything shipped in this country, is permanently more expensive as a result. Your groceries are more expensive, your Amazon packages are more expensive, your building materials are more expensive, your medicine is more expensive, and the companies absorbing those costs are either passing them to you or cutting staff to maintain margins. Either way, you lose. A food economics professor at Michigan State told PBS that if oil prices remain high, the cost of fresh food will rise because it gets to the supermarket using diesel. An EY chief economist estimated that due to the oil volatility and the Hormuz disruption, inflation in March 2026 could increase by nearly a full percentage point above the 2.4% recorded in February. Goldman Sachs projects headline inflation could spike to 4.5% this spring. And the Federal Reserve, which is supposed to manage inflation, is trapped. It cannot cut rates because inflation is too high. It cannot raise rates because the labor market is too fragile. It is sitting at 3.5 to 3.75% with no good options in either direction. That is what changed. The cost structure of American life shifted upward, and the tools to bring it back down are either broken or unavailable, and the average American has no idea. The world that existed 6 months ago is gone, and most people are still living in it. I want to put all of this in one place now because I think the reason most people do not understand what happened is that these changes arrived separately through different channels at different times, reported by different outlets, and nobody assembled them into a single picture. So let me do that for you right now. Since October 2025, the following things happened to the average American family. Their health insurance premiums doubled if they were on the ACA marketplace. Their SNAP benefits were cut or made conditional on documenting 80 hours of work per month, even for people aged 55 to 64. Their Medicaid coverage became contingent on work requirements that will strip coverage from millions of people who already qualify. Their student loan options were capped at levels that will make professional education unaffordable for the next generation. The CFPB, the one federal agency specifically designed to protect consumers from predatory financial practices, was gutted by the current administration. Gas went from $2.80 to $4.08. Diesel went from $3.80 to $5.40. Brent crude touched $126. The Strait of Hormuz closed, cutting 20% of global oil and a third of global fertilizer during planting season. The IEA called it the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve was drawn down by the largest amount ever, and it did not fix the problem. Fertilizer prices surged 47%. The FAO warned of a 3-month window before a global food crisis. The national debt crossed $39 trillion with interest payments exceeding $1 trillion a year for the first time in history. The economy lost 92,000 jobs in February. AI became the #1 reason for layoffs. The private credit market hit record defaults at 9.2%, with major funds gating investor withdrawals. And electric bills exploded 40 to 100% across the country, while people used less energy. Every single one of those things happened in the last 6 months. And every single one of them makes the others worse. Higher energy costs drive higher food costs. Higher food costs strain family budgets. Strained budgets increase credit card debt. Higher credit card debt at 22.8% APR generates interest payments that consume disposable income. Consumed disposable income reduces consumer spending. Reduced spending weakens the labor market. A weaker labor market makes it harder to meet work requirements for Medicaid and SNAP. Failed work requirements strip healthcare and food assistance from the people who need it most, exactly when they need it most. The system is not broken. It is working exactly as redesigned. It is extracting resources from the bottom and transferring them to the top, while using the complexity of the tax code and the opacity of a 116-page bill to make sure the average American cannot see it happening until it is already done. And it is already done. So what do? You do the only thing that has ever worked when the system stops working for you. You take care of yourself. You pay down high-interest debt before the next shock hits. You stock your pantry while prices are still at current levels. You build even a small cash reserve, $25 a week, because cash is options and options are survival. You audit every single charge on your bank statement this week and eliminate everything that is not essential. You have the honest conversation with your family about real numbers, real debt, real expenses, and real contingency plans. And you pay attention, because the people who get hurt worst in moments like this are never the ones who lacked intelligence or work ethic. They are the ones who trusted the narrative. They believed it when they were told this was a tax cut. They believed it when they were told the war would be short. They believed it when they were told inflation was coming down. They believed it when they were told the economy was strong. And by the time they realized the narrative was wrong, the changes had already been made, the programs had already been cut, the costs had already been locked in, and the safety nets had already been removed. Do not be that person. The average American had no idea what just changed. But you do now. And what you do with that knowledge in the next 90 days is going to determine how your family comes through this. If this video showed you something you did not know, send it to one person who needs to hear it. Not for me, not for the algorithm. Because I believe the conversations that happen between real people in real kitchens matter more than anything that happens on cable news or in the halls of Congress. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story is evolving every single week, and I am going to keep telling it whether it is convenient or not. No spin, no agenda, just the data and what it actually means for your life. Take care of yourselves out there. Take care of your families. Strengthen your circle, and I will see you in the next one.